Aloha. This reading is in reference to the relationship of the human story to the so-called flat earth story, and just a formal interpretation from Dr. John Henrik Clarke of where I'm coming from when I approach the information and the very nature of the heliocentric model and what has come as a result of the Columbian era of so-called Western civilization, to give more of an insight to people who still think that as long as everybody just figures out that the earth is flat, then everything will be okay. That is the biggest lie, next to the lie that we live on a globe. It is not going to be okay because everybody just sees that the earth is not a globe and everything is flat. The true healing occurs when people understand the depths of the systems that have come as a result of being lied to and being separated from the roots and the origins of your very existence, your culture, your people, your understandings, and overstandings of your reality as a whole, the physical and the non-physical, the psychological, the spiritual, and the physical. All of the above. Once all of these systems get balanced out, then you will have an opportunity to actually make some forward progress. That is healing the wounds of this system that have been a result, the wounds from a result of this heliocentric system, of this illusory power grid that the Columbian era has forced down the throats of humanity for centuries. One of the biggest responses that I hear in these flat versus globe videos is, what's a proof that we live on a globe? And what's the educational system response to that? Columbus sailed the ocean blue and ... Well, let me give you an example of the true nature of Columbus and that response in reference to flat earth from Dr. John Henrik Clarke, the introduction to Leo Wiener's Africa and the Discovery of America. Introduction. When Leo Wiener's 3-volume work, Africa and the Discovery of America, was published in the early 1920s, research in the pre-Columbian presence of Africans in the New World was generally unknown. The scholars, writers, and teachers who dared to mention the possibility of a pre-Columbian African presence were not taken seriously. Professor Wiener's work was a pioneering effort that opened readers' eyes to a new information not previously considered. This field of study would be later popularized by Professor Ivan van Sertima in his book, They Came Before Columbus, The African in Ancient America. The scholars of African descent who did able work in the field before Professor van Sertima, Legrand, Clegg, Ronald Davis, Carter G. Woodson, and J. A. Rogers, they are outstanding. And it is my belief that a careful study of the work of Leo Wiener on the pre-Columbian presence of Africans in the Americas and the scholars that follow him will lead to a study of the role of Africans and their relationship to the world. This study reveals that African people have been great adventurers, culture carriers, and culture collectors among the people of the world. It further reveals that in all this adventuring and wandering, the Africans never launched a destructive war on the people that they met, and that a friendship existed between them and the host nation that they met. It created an amalgam of two people that created a separate culture with its own distinctiveness. The main reason this fact is unknown is that the content of education, textbooks, religious teachings, and the Bible itself has been controlled for the last 500 years by Europeans. They have projected an assumption on the world that they did not have to prove because, in general, powerful people do not have to prove anything except they are powerful. Number 1. The myth of the European as a discoverer of other people. There is a tendency to give the European credit for discovering people who were not lost. Number 2. The myth of the European as a spreader of civilization. In general, no people has ever spread any civilization anywhere at any time. People spread their way of life nearly always at the expense of destroying other people's way of life. The world did not wait in darkness for Europeans to bring the light of civilization and the culture. As a matter of fact, Europeans put out more light than they brought, and they destroyed civilizations that were already old before Europe was born. This fact is emphasized in part in the book The Devastation of the Indies, a brief account by Father Bartolomé de las Casas, sometimes referred to as the first historian of the New World. In his book, he estimates that from 12 to 25 million indigenous inhabitants of the Americas were murdered to accommodate Christopher Columbus's alleged discovery. After nearly 500 years and enough books about Christopher Columbus and his discovery to fill a library, we are still not too clear as to who Christopher Columbus was. If he was an Italian, why did he spend so much time in Portugal and in Spain? If he was from the lower social class, how could he have married into the upper social class of his day? Where did he get his training as a sailor and a navigator? He indicates in one fragment of his diary that he had been to what was referred to as the Guinea Coast, West Africa, and that he had spent 28 years at sea prior to 1492. If this is so, there is a possibility that he could have been part of the early Portuguese slave trade. In 1492, he emerged as Admiral of the Ocean Seas with Queen Isabella of Spain's endorsement. What petty officer and officer positions did he hold prior to his appointment? In essence, how did he qualify to be Admiral of the Oceans and the Seas with so little experience in command that the world knows about? Maybe one of the great myths in history is Christopher Columbus himself. He is a reigning hero of Western civilization and an internationally known discoverer who discovered absolutely nothing. If Christopher Columbus did not discover the Americas, what exactly did he do of great significance? He opened up the Western Hemisphere, North and South American and the Caribbean islands for European exploration and eventual domination. He helped to set in motion a concept of divine white right that violated every law of God and man. This concept rescued Europe from the lethargy of the Middle Ages, created modern capitalism and the scientific and technical world that we know today. That is why, among other reasons, the Europeans saw fit to read the Africans out of the respectful commentary of human history, to recognize the pre-Columbian presence of the Africans in what is referred to as the New World and their contributions to the indigenous cultures that were already here, in tantamount to recognizing his full human beingness. You cannot do this to a people and justify their enslavement. For 500 years, the world has been mainly ruled by a form of European nationalism that negated or denied the contribution of other people to that human activity referred to as civilization. Professor Wiener's book shows that Africans along with the indigenous Americans referred to as Indians, were partners in the creation of a durable civilization long before the emergence of the Europeans in this part of the world. In his book, Professor Wiener tells us more than the facts about pre-Columbian presence of Africans in the New World. This is a book not only of the exchange and the amalgam of culture. This is a book about the development of products such as cotton and the origin of some of the vegetation we all take for granted. In a not too subtle way, Professor Wiener is saying that the geography now referred to as the Americas and the Caribbean islands could have done without the discovery of by Europeans and might have been better off. The encroachment of Europeans on the land, people, and cultures of this part of the world as a protracted act of aggression that has not ended until this day. It is clear that Africans and indigenous Americans could have put together an amalgamated way of life without destructive war against each other. For the European to have achieved this, he would have to respect the humanity of the people that he found, and he showed no tendency to do so in spite of the fact that most of them treated Europeans as guests until they decided to be conquerors and enslavers. The Europeans encountered the indigenous Americans at a turning point in world history between 1400 and 1600 AD. This mistreatment of these people and their slow disappearance through disease, murder, and starvation depopulated large areas of the Americas and the Caribbean islands. Christopher Columbus asked for Father de las Casas, who came over on his third voyage, to petition the Pope for an increase in the African slave trade, allegedly to save the soul of the Indians. The Pope sent commissions to inquire into the condition of the Indians, only to discover that on some islands in the Caribbean Sea, there was not one Indian left alive. This book is about an event in history that changed the world for all times. It is a sad story that did not have to be. What the Africans and the indigenous Americans have given to the world is a part of the total humanity that must be respectfully considered in order to build a world where all people can walk in peace and dignity with their respective contributions accepted. Dr. John Henrik Clarke, April 1992. Let me read another key part to this introduction to emphasize where I'm coming from in relation to flat Earth. The Europeans encountered the indigenous Americans at a turning point in world history between 1400 and 1600 AD. These are the same time frames that Neil deGrasse Tyson references in reference to the origin of so-called Western civilization as we know it today, based upon the invention of the telescope and the microscope. At that time frame, the heliocentric model was also being installed into the mainstream consciousness across the earth plane. These mindsets are the foundation to the flat earth or the heliocentric mentality. It's the foundation to what has happened as a result of heliocentrism and the dominance not only of the physical people, but of the psychological constructs of humanity as a whole that is actually founded in the spiritual separation from each other and the earth plane and nature itself. If we are only focusing on flat versus globe, you will be missing the entire point of this discovery, of this rediscovery of what has actually happened here. If you stay on that frame of mind and do not shift gears into the human experience, you will be setting yourself up for failure. You will be setting yourself up for a one-on-one game against the so-called powers that be, who shouldn't even be in the stadium in the first place. They have zero humanity in their engagement with the masses as a whole. If you think this is a game, you are sorely mistaken. If you think this is something that can just be fixed by a billboard or a YouTube video or showing curvature, no curvature, of exposing NASA, you are sorely mistaken. On every side of these arguments will always be the human story. And until these wounds that are a result of the destructive nature of this mindset, this is not to point a finger at white people or Europeans or so on and so forth. I am speaking in reference to the destructive mentality of control, dominance, manipulation, and illusion that isn't only limited to the story of race, but goes down to the frequency and vibration of individuals who accept this kind of reality as their so-called civilization, and not only accept it, but defend it because of the ignorance of not knowing what this system really is about. So I just wanted to share that with everybody, not just the so-called flat earth community, but everybody. This information needs to be heard. It needs to be known, and it needs to be at the core of the healing process that includes realizations like the not globe earth and so on and so forth. Before any sort of forward progress takes shape, the healing first needs to be recognized, acknowledged, and activated within every single individual. That can take generations. But if it doesn't start, then you will just continue the same process of ignorance that has been amplified by this same destructive program that claims to have control and dominance over you today and your future generations. So please, if you're a content creator or not, whatever it is, keep this information in mind. Keep these stories and perspectives in mind when you take on the idea of truther and forward progress and so on and so forth. So thank you for joining me, and until next time, from all my relations, peace, love, and harmony.